Grade in the comment. Grade in the comment. What grade would you get? Great J-Quad. Grade in the comment.
So every day, more pages of this guy.
Rate in a comment for Junk with the Atom. Rate in a comment. Sure. Write in a comment.
What's the one? You're like, wait,
All right, so our choice of soundtrack was I did 80s. The last time the Dodgers were either in or won the World Series. I know in your lifetime that is something that you have never seen, so I try to connect you kind of with the music of the time when the Dodgers could actually win. But I'll get over it. Actually, why don't you share with your I think you already did, but why don't you share with your next door neighbor your opinion of Jaquad or John Quincy Adams? What grade are you giving it?
I gave him a B- because he had failed. So he's just they didn't play out very well.
Okay, so finish up that thought. Okay. On a 3 count. Everybody. So, on a 3 count, I want us to vote. So, if you think that John Quincy Adams was awesome, okay, that's an A or B grade. You're going to give him the thumbs up, maybe 1 thumbs up for a B, 2 thumbs up for an A. If you think he's meh, okay, sideways thumb. If you think he's a failure, 1 thumb down. If you think he's an epic failure, 2 thumbs down. Okay? So, on a count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Kind of down. Okay.
Like nice diagonal.
Middling seems to be the consensus. Well, it's not quite a consensus, but the most here. Who would like to speak to middling? Who would like to speak to the middlingness of Jaquad? Mr. Middle Jaquad. You want to speak to the middle, Rita? Okay.
Sure.
His middleness.
Yeah, I gave him a solid C because I felt that even though his policies didn't play out well, I felt they weren't like bad intent. They weren't made of like bad intentions. He did like he favored a strong central government, and he did favor the North. That was just like a thing. And a strong central government, like people feared it, but it's not necessarily like incredibly bad. Like it was sort of like it did need to be improved a little. And then also people just like blaming the president for everything. Like today, like we're always like, why hasn't Barack Obama made a statement on this? So I feel like it was his attitude that mainly people didn't like. So.
I saw some downers. Who were anyone want to speak to down? I didn't see any real epic failures, but I saw some downs. Down. No one wants to speak to down? Do I have to read? Thank you. All right.
He had a very aristocratic nature, and almost all of his proposals were defeated by Congress, and he had like an I'm better than everyone attitude, so like I was just did not favor that.
Got it. And I didn't see. Did I see anybody that said awesome?
Yeah.
But not you. What's that? Or did you say awesome?
Was awesome the one?
Yeah.
Oh.
Just awesome-ish.
Yeah, I'd
Positive.
give him a B.
Why?
Because I don't think that he should get a C or below a C just because he came off as arrogant or like I'm better than you. Like I think like if he's president, like he kind of like he's more fit to rule than like the common people. Like I think that he has more like political experience. And he had, I think that he was competent. He just had a lot, like there was a lot of resistance against him, and he did fail to relate to the commoners and enact policies that would benefit them, or even alter policies to. So there's like a compromise middle ground.
Right.
But I think that like he had good ideas, and if maybe Congress worked with him instead of just like bringing everything down. Like,
You kind of remind you of anybody right now? I mean, not the arrogant attitude, but our current situation, right? president being very successful at getting stuff done right now. Okay. So, you know, factoring that into your grade, maybe. Factoring that into your grade. Anyway, so today we're going to shift from John Quincy Adams to Andy Jackson. And what I'm going to want to do is talk about kind of 4 main things that happened in his presidency. But I'm going to leave a part up to you. The part that I'm leaving up to you is the so what, the impact. What is the impact of Andy Jackson? And so for your entrance ticket for next time, I want you to describe the impact. I want you to see, you know, what's important about Jackson's presidency, a description. And 2, part of that impact, I want you to actually look in the textbook. And it talks about Jackson's effect on the Supreme Court by appointing a new Chief Justice, a guy by the name of Roger Taney. And 2, what his effect, what his presidency, how it kind of affects state governments. So it's kind of a triple treat. I want you to an evaluation of an overall what his impact is. B, 2 specifics. Something address the impact of the court, the Taney court, and 2 on state governments. Okay. Does that make sense? You're right. So if I recall, we were about to talk about the election of 1828, okay? And so in 1828, we are going to see really the formation of what some people call the Second American Party System. The first American Party system was the Federalists versus the Jeffersonian Republicans. Or the Democratic Republicans. In 1828, bless you.
Thank you.
In 1828, we're going to see the crystallization of a second American party system, which starts out in this election to be the National Republicans versus the Democratic Republicans. In other words, a split of the Republicans, which eventually becomes the National Republicans will be known later as the Whigs. We'll find out why. And the Democratic Republicans will be known as the Democrats. Okay, so we're going to see the birth of one of our current parties today. So in this election, the National Republicans, later the Whigs, John Quincy Adams is going to run. But if you asked him if he was running, he would say, no, I am not running. I'll stand for election, and if the people want me, they'll vote for me. But I'm not running. Now, what did he mean by that? Well, he didn't believe that it was proper, okay, to be going around saying, please vote for me, please vote for me, please vote for me, okay? That, ew. Yeah, you don't do that. But I will put my name out there. And if you want me, you'll pick me. Got it? You could say it goes back to that aristocratic attitude. Well, the Democrats, the Democratic Republicans, or as Andy Jackson liked to call them, the democracy. They run. This is going to be a true kind of creation of a real political party. In this, as they create this, kind of the mastermind is Martin Van Buren. And what Martin Van Buren's going to do is going to try and do a little bit to the past, okay? Jefferson. The Jeffersonian ideals of the farmer, the northern farmer. But also to the artisans, and add laborers in the north. But also southern planters. Now, this party is really what we would call a coalition of kind of diverse interests. Because the way that kind of Martin Van Buren imagines this is that this party is going to be one that wants the common people, common man, the laborers, the small farmers in the north, vote for the democracy. And that's going to really be the theme of the party. But the democracy, these common people, they cannot win on their own. They're going to need help. And you see, in the South, they had not undergone the same transformation of politics. In the South, they were still dependent, or maybe that's not the best word. They were still governed, in effect, by the aristocratic plantation owners. And so what Martin Van Buren is basically going to do is he's going to marry these two different groups. One group that is kind of aristocratic in nature, and the other, the common man, everybody gets to vote, it's fabulous, yay! And he's going to marry them into one party. And in effect, there's going to be a deal. And what the deal is, the southern planters will vote on behalf of these Democrats in the north. So long as the Democrats in the north don't do anything about slavery. Got it? So it's kind of awkward, it's kind of ironic. But this thing based on democracy, woo, is preserved with slavery. They can't win without the slaveholders. Can you see? I mean, that's what a coalition is. You bring two groups together to make the majority. This group is not the majority. They need help. And so they take the help from the plantation owners, but the deal is they don't mess with slavery. And in effect, what the deal will do is it will allow the South to basically overwhelm anti-slavery forces for about another generation plus. As anti-slavery sentiment starts to grow, basically this common man party, okay, the Democrats, will basically side with the plantation owners to win. And by winning, the South basically gets protected, insulated against anti-slavery sentiment. Get it? So the theme of the party will be more toward what the northern artisans, laborers, farmers want. Basically, what Martin Van Buren will say is that what he wants to do is destroy artificial distinctions in society to create equality in rights. Okay, there shouldn't be these notables that get better things than everybody else. There should be an equity of that. And once again, you can see this horrible irony of these people demanding equity, but in order to get it, they preserve slavery. The other thing that the Democrats will do is they're going to try and speak somewhat neutrally toward the issue of the tariff. Remember that the tariff of 1828 was one which raised the tariff on, which pretty much helped the North. And who didn't like it so much? The South. Well, Now all of a sudden you got somebody who wants a foot in both camps. You want both a foot over with northern interests and you want a foot with southern interests. So what do you say about the tariff? A judicious tariff. What does that mean? What do you want it to mean? If you want it to mean lower, if you want it to mean higher. Judicious, a nice basic word to make it so that you can pretend that you're meeting everybody's interests. Got it? The election was a nasty one. Yeah.
Wait, could you just like give a quick example of like what the judicious tariff is?
There is not an example of what a judicious tariff is, because it's a word that's basically trying to, when I'm running for office, I'm going to say I'm in favor of judicious tariff, which basically means that I will be fair. But who gets to decide what fair means? I do. Does that make sense? And so the reason why I'm not going to say I want it higher, I want it lower, is I don't want to lose anybody. So I go for a more neutral sounding word. Get it? Anyway, the election itself is really nasty. The people that were in favor of Andy Jackson would attack John Quincy Adams for the corrupt bargain. They would say that he's too aristocratic. They said that when he remodeled the White House, finally cleaning up from what happened during the War of 1812, that he misappropriated public funds, that he bought gaming furniture for the White House. Yes, a pool table, people. Gaming furniture. They even said he pimped for the Russian ambassador. Okay, some nasty stuff. Now the National Republicans, so the Whigs, also are going to attack Jackson. And largely what they're going to do is attack his personality and maybe do some very personal things. For one, they called his mama a prostitute. Okay. Now, there's very little real basis for this. His mom was widowed and had to raise 3 sons. One son was captured in the American Revolution, and she went to the prison camp to try and release him, and found that he was sick, and she got sick too, and she died, leaving Jackson an orphan. And they're calling his mama a prostitute. Secondly, see this up here in the corner? Those are flyers that they would hand out. Basically, and what this represented, all those coffins are people that Andy Jackson had personally killed in duels. Okay? Do you want a murderer as your president? You want somebody who, as soon as look at you, he'll shoot you. This guy that, when he actually did become president, when there's going to be an assassination attempt, and the guy's gun misfires, and what does Andy Jackson do? He runs after him and beats him with his cane. Okay, I mean this is who Andy Jackson is. Now the final thing that they attacked Andy Jackson on was his wife. Not at this point. Not during the campaign. During the campaign, okay, she's alive, and they call her a bigamist. Okay. The thing is it was true. Now this was a long time ago when Andy Jackson and his not wife at the time were really young. Okay. And his not wife at the time, her name was Rachel Robards, and she was married to this nasty guy, okay, who did not treat her very well. And when he did not treat her well, usually it preceded him leaving town for a while. And when he left town for a while, who did Rachel Robards see comfort and solace from? Young Andy Jackson. One time, Robards didn't come back. And so young Andy and young Rachel decide to get married. You might admit, you didn't miss anything here. Rachel failed to get a divorce before she married Andy Jackson. To do this, they went down to Mexico. Okay. Well, eventually they do get a divorce. And again, this is years and years ago. This is when they were really, really young. Nashville, Tennessee was the frontier. I mean, marriages were barely happening anyway. It was crazy time. Well, now, Rachel was kind of the top of Nashville society. Okay? And these attacks on her character, she does not take well. Well, Jackson wins the election. Okay? He wins the election largely from votes from the West, the South, and laborers in the East. That's the coalition that gets him elected. But between the time he is elected and the time that he was going to take office, Rachel gets sick. And she doesn't take care of herself. She kind of, the way that it's described is that she kind of lost her will to live. And she dies. So now you're thinking of this guy who basically will shoot you as soon as look at you. How's he feeling about his opponents and the tactics that they used during the election? Is he, and do you think he's the forgiving type? It was a far more clear election than the messy election of 1824. John Quincy Adams mainly just does well in John Quincy Adams land. So now, I want you to look at this picture. And, yeah.
All those people who killed in duels, did he did he challenge any of them in the duels? Did they challenge them?
Some, yes. Some just accepted. He actually, in one of the duels, he took on two guys, the Benton brothers, okay, in one duel. And basically, in that duel, they got bullets into him, he got bullets into them. Nobody died. But for the rest of his life, Andy Jackson is going to be carrying around, I think it was Jesse Benton's bullet in his belly. It was too close to his vital organs for them to remove it. So, and it would abscess every now and again. So and it affected his appetite. He never really had a good hunger from that point forward. He mainly just ate meat and drank whiskey. And he had trouble keeping weight on. He only weighed about 150 pounds. But he was 6'2". So you kind of get this picture of this guy. Okay. Anyway. So, take a look at this picture. And in your notebook, I want you to basically react to A, this picture, and B, I'm going to read you a journal entry from a woman by the name of Margaret Bayard Smith. Margaret Bayard Smith. And what Margaret Bayard Smith is going to do is she's going to describe the day that Andy Jackson became President of the United States. Okay? So, this is what she is seeing. This is what she is seeing. Thousands and thousands of people without distinction of rank collected in an immense mass around the Capitol. They stood silently, orderly, and tranquil, with their eyes fixed on the front of that building, waiting for the president to appear. Finally, preceded by marshals and surrounded by judges of the Supreme Court, the president advanced and bowed to the people. They greeted him with shouts that shook the air. Cannons from Alexandria and Fort Warburton fired salutes. It was grand. It was sublime. A breathless silence soon followed as the crowd listened to hear the sound of his voice. After reading his speech, the oath of office was administered to him by the Chief Justice. The President then bowed again to the people. Had the day ended there, even Europeans would have been impressed by the majesty of the silent and tranquil crowd. Unfortunately, that was not to be. By 10 o'clock, the streets and avenues were crowded with carriages and wagons and carts filled with women and children, some in finery and some in rags. For it was the people's president, and all would see him. We were informed that the crowd in front of the president's house had diminished, and that we might be able to enter the reception that was being held there. But what a scene did we witness! The majesty of the people disappeared, and a mob of men, women, and children scrambled and romped through the house. What a pity. No arrangements had been made. No police officers were on duty, and the whole house was full of the mob. The president, after almost having been torn to pieces by people eager to shake his hand, had retreated through the back to his lodgings at a hotel. Thousands of dollars worth of glass and china had been broken in the rush for refreshments. Ladies fainted, men quarreled, and such a scene of confusion took place that it is impossible to describe. Finally, the windows were thrown open, and the crowd rushed through them onto the lawn. This turn of events had not been anticipated. Only ladies and gentlemen were expected at the occasion, not the people en masse. But it was the people's day, and the people's president, and the people would rule. So I want you to react to that really quickly. Two levels here. What is kind of this picture and the description? What do they kind of show about Jackson in that day? And then B, what was her perception? What was her perception? So kind of the picture, and just kind of the description. What does it kind of show about that day? And then 2, what is her perception? So I want you to write that for a moment. Finish what you're writing. We're going to let Ms. Peaks and Ms. Pulia choose who's going to talk to us here. Okay, so Matthew, what did you think? Mateo, what did you think?
I think that it kind of perceived that Jackson was like kind of a beast, like because he would kill people and like.
Okay.
So it kind of showed what kind of like rule he would have over the United States.
Okay. Yes, what do you?
I don't know. I think like he's the kind of like person that brings all the classes together. Like he said, like there's no distinction between the classes. So there, I think everyone like
Okay, so I take that this bringing together thing. What about her attitude toward him? I mean, there's a certain thing that kind of came out about her attitude. What was her attitude?
I thought that she kind of saw him as kind of grand in the way he brought the people together, but it was also kind of chaotic in the different social classes.
Okay. Did she approve? Did she approve? You're shaking no. What do you think she said? What do you think she was saying?
Well, whenever she said this was just for ladies and gentlemen, she wasn't. She didn't think the lower class should have been there, and it should have just been people who not just who voted, but like the people who like were gonna be very involved with the government, not just normal people who like don't really care that much about it. And these are people who just wanted Jackson to be president because he's not an aristocrat.
I think she definitely was thinking these people didn't belong. And maybe that meant that Jackson didn't belong either. All right, so good job, you guys. I think you guys kind of got it down here. So very quickly, I'm just going to do kind of a description of who Jackson is and his kind of attitudes. His general attitude is that he is suspicious of central government. Now, this is kind of your, what today we would call the outsider. Somebody who wants to become president because they think that what the current people are doing is they're doing it all wrong. And so think of it as John Quincy Adams and his big government programs and everything like that. No, we don't do it that way. The other thing about Jackson is he has been, for much of his life, a general. And when you're a general, your expectation toward what people do when you say to do it, okay? I was in ROTC for a while in college. And I got in an argument with the commanding major of our unit about what it was that an officer was supposed to be. And basically what it came down to is that he said to me is that in the Army, when we tell you to jump, we don't want you to ask how high. We want you to already know. Jackson basically wants absolute support of his subordinates. If you are below him in the food chain, what are you supposed to do when he tells you to do something? You do it. Got it? Jackson also believed in the supremacy of the people in a certain way. If the people want it, they rule. Even if the United States Supreme Court disagrees. That basically everything we could just determine by voting on it. And so he even wanted to change the United States Constitution. The Constitution had been written to insulate the United States Supreme Court from the people. It had made it so that Supreme Court justices were appointed for life. If you're appointed for life, are you more, as likely to listen to whatever is popular or whatnot that's out there? Or are you going to supposedly like follow the law? Okay. Jackson wanted them to be voted. Jackson wanted elections for Supreme Court justices so that they would be more likely to be guided by the will of the people. He also changed how the veto was used. Used it often 12 times. Now that's not quite, recently they've kind of slowed down on veto, but years ago during George Herbert Walker Bush's presidency, that's Bush the first, he used the veto some 30, 40 times, okay? But the way that George Bush the Elder used it and the way that Andy Jackson used it is fairly similar. They used it because they disagreed with the law. Up until Andy Jackson, the only way that anybody ever vetoed anything was when they really thought that a law was more unconstitutional. It just shouldn't exist because the Constitution is really not saying you should do that. James Madison used it to stop a road project from being built entirely within a state because he thought that that's not in the Constitution for the federal government to build things entirely within a state. So he vetoed it. Jackson vetoed things because he disagreed with you. I don't like your law. Gone. In the opinion of the people at that day, is that this was an overuse of power. That basically it's the president just going zap, zap, zap to laws. And so they thought that he exercised power kind of like a king. So they start mocking him and calling him King Andrew. And if they're particularly surly, they called him King Ma. Because where do you get his power? Ma. This was a political cartoon that depicted this, the King Andrew I, a veto memory. Had I been consulted, born to command, and standing on the Constitution of the United States. The National Republicans took this attitude that Andrew Jackson was behaving like a king so seriously that they renamed their party. You see, in England, you had the two parties, the Tory party, the Conservative party that was more the King's party, and you had the Whig party that was more in favor of commercial interests, or the anti-King party. Well, in America, the party that is against the king, King Andrew, will now become known as the Whigs. It's kind of a joke, in a funny kind of way. All right. So, again, I'm kind of painting a picture here of Andrew Jackson. Do you all have any questions kind of on who he is and where he stands? So, when Andrew Jackson came into office, he called it the Revolution of 1828. As in this unit, well, it would not be, I couldn't really talk to you unless I was going to tell you about another revolution. So, the Revolution of 1828 is the democratic revolution. The revolution of the common man, the revolution of the common voter, that this is where they emerge. Jackson used this change of party in power to basically implement what Martin Van Buren had kind of created in New York when he built his political machine. If you were someone who helped get Andrew Jackson elected by campaigning on his behalf, voting and getting other people to vote on his behalf, donating huge chunks of money to his party, okay, he would reward you. And what would he reward you with? An appointment to public office. Well, in order to have the jobs, to be able to appoint all these supporters to these public offices, guess what he does with all the people that were currently in public office? He fires them. So everybody think of the federal government, every postal clerk, every tariff collector, every tax collector, every person who has a job within the federal government, all of a sudden, as Andy Jackson showing up, you're all fired. Yeah?
Isn't that almost like a corrupt bargain that he was accusing us of?
It is kind of like that now, isn't it?
Like worse.
Yeah, because it's everybody, isn't it? Yeah?
He fires them so he can give them.
He fires them so he can give his new people their job. He called it rotation in office. He even joked about it. He said, we'll throw their rascals out and put our rascals in, and if they win next time, they can throw our rascals out and put their rascals in. Rotation of office. It keeps people from getting too comfy in these jobs, because that's good, because as government you should be comfortable in those jobs anyway. And this is a serious thing. At the beginning of, whenever you had a shift over from one party to another at that time, All of a sudden, in front of the president's house, you get this massive line that goes down the street blocks and blocks. And what did the president do for 3, 4, 5 hours each day? People walked in, they made their case for why they had, how they had gotten that president elected, and then the president says, okay, I will make you a postal clerk in Indiana. I will make you a tariff collector in New York. I will make you the ambassador to France. Basically just dispensing all the public jobs. One of the problems is that people were sometimes able to buy their offices. You donate a lot. You expect what type of position, what type of appointment? Big. And also, are you appointing people on the basis of their talents, their abilities, what they can do? No. And so it had a tendency to fill the government with illiterates, incompetents, and that may not have changed, and crooks. We have our very, very first huge embezzlement scandal in American history with one of these Jacksonian appointments. But if you appoint everybody to office this way, and your expectation is that if I've appointed you to a subordinate position, what are you supposed to do and say to me? Yes, sir. You look fabulous today, sir. Wow, sir. Do you have any great ideas for me to say is great today? Thank you. The problem is, if you bring these people together and ask them for their opinion or their advice, what type of advice are they going to give you? Whatever you want to hear. And so Jackson, presented with that problem, is going to seek advice, not from his cabinet, not from the people that are supposed to be his advisors, but he basically just invites his friends over to his kitchen and asks them their opinion. This will become known as the kitchen cabinet. Another joke. Look at that. 2 pages, 2 jokes. The kitchen cabinet, which mockingly met in his hand. So now, 3 big issues that happened in his presidency. Okay, so we're going to talk about an issue surrounding the tariff that we created last time, the tariff of 1828, tariff of abominations. We're going to talk about Andy Jackson and his attitude toward banking, and then finally we're going to talk about Andy Jackson's American Indian policy. So these are the 3 big kind of things I kind of want you to know. Now, in order to talk about the tariff, we've got to go back in time a little bit. Remember the tariff of 1828? The tariff of 1828 was a tariff that rose the protective tariff on manufactured goods. It also raised the tariff on raw materials up to a height of about 45%. This tariff was so high that what section of the country was unhappy? The South. Why was the South unhappy? Do you remember? The South thought were the people who did most of the importing. And so they felt that unfairly, they have to pay the tariff. They have to pay the higher taxes, the higher prices, more than anybody else. So they called the tariff of abominations, okay? They said that the tariff was wrong. Well, in 1828, the Vice President of the United States under John Quincy Adams, and he will become the Vice President again under Andy Jackson, was a guy by the name of John C. Calhoun. He's from South Carolina. and he's going to write an article that was known as the South Carolina Exposition. He wrote it anonymously, but it's been a long time. We now know it was him. At the time, he wrote it kind of in secret. Why did he write it kind of in secret as to who he was? Because he was Vice President of the United States. He thought it was kind of uncool to attack the president when you're Vice President. Okay? So, he says that the tariff is unjust and unconstitutional. The tariff is unjust and unconstitutional. Now, his version of unconstitutional is not so much that it violated a particular part of the Constitution. Instead, the way that he believed it was unconstitutional was that he believed that the Constitution was a compact of sovereign states. And that if you create a law that basically favors one group in the compact over other people in the compact, you're violating the compact. Okay, so that's the way he's thinking unconstitutional means. Well, he gives us an answer. He says that if the federal government should pass a law that violates the compact, that violates the Constitution, that a state be able to fix that problem via nullification. Such a cool word. They called it the doctrine of nullification. And basically what it would do is it would allow a state to look at a law that they disagreed with or thought was unconstitutional, and they could zap! That law would no longer be valid within their state. Think about that for a moment. I think someone earlier mentioned Obamacare. Imagine if states could pick and choose whether or not they were going to belong or not. Would it really be a thing? And so, basically, what John C. Calhoun here is saying, states can pick and choose. I will obey that law. I will not obey that law. I am hoping that right now you are thinking this sounds like something we talked about before. Okay, so write down right now, okay? Is this similar to anything that we have already talked about, okay? Is this similar to something, okay? And I'm trying to make you stretch your own brain right now. What was this like? Okay, there was something very, very, very like this we talked about before. Okay? There was that thing. What was that thing? What was that thing? That thing. Okay, a moment, trying to stretch it out themselves.
Was stretch a clue?
No, not quite. Not quite.
So she it sounds so like
All right, so, Moriel, do you want to put us out of our misery? Which one is it? What is it? It's the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, precisely. Okay, you remember? Okay, so, a refresher in case you forget. When the Adams administration, so the other Adams administration, passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, making it basically illegal to talk bad about the government. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison pushed through Virginia and Kentucky resolutions condemning the Alien and Sedition Acts, stating that states had this right to, in effect, overturn federal law. Okay, so it's the same principle. John C. Calhoun is bringing it back, basically saying, we never resolved this. We never resolved this idea that if the central government were to make things that in effect really hurts one state or one section, shouldn't that one state or one section be able to defend itself? Well, they should, with nullification. The Virginia and Kentucky residents, it's important, may even be a catch question. So now, it's 1832, and in 1832, the Congress is going to pass another high tariff, another protective tariff. Now, it's a little bit lower than the tariff of abominations. It's not 45%, it's like 33, 34%. But, is it still conceptually a high tariff? Is it still something that seems to affect the South more than other areas of the country? Oh yes, it does. And so this new tariff is going to create a reaction in the state of South Carolina. In South Carolina, they start debating whether or not it was proper for the federal government to pass this high tariff, which is so detrimental to the South. But as the debate goes on, you start to see kind of some paranoia developing in South Carolina. They start to say, well, wait a minute. If the central government can pass a law that is anti-South as far as the tariff is concerned, mightn't they be able to pass a law regarding slavery? OMG, they might. And so, they decide that they need to be able to protect themselves not only from the tariff, but from any eventuality where the federal government might target them specifically. So they create a procedure within the state of South Carolina in which they could nullify federal law. Now, who's saying this? Is South Carolina saying this? They're saying to central government, if we don't like your law, we have a way of remedying it. We have a system for nullification. And what it was, not that important, it was a 2/3 vote in both of their legislatures. That's what it would be. But it's just really the fact that they can. And then they do. In 1833, they are going to declare the tariffs of 1828 and 1832 to be null and void. In effect, it's saying to the central government, we don't need your stinking tariff. If a ship comes in with goods coming into South Carolina, we're not going to charge it. We're not going to collect it. No tariffs here. Tariff-free zone. We're not going to do it. So now, President Jackson. And President Jackson, remember, is suspicious of central government, but think of this precedent of being able to overturn federal law and what it would mean, what it would do to the Union. And basically what Andy Jackson is facing is kind of his George Washington moment. George Washington had the whiskey rebels. They don't want to pay the whiskey tax. And what did George Washington do? What did George Washington do? He sent in the army. Well, this time it's not just a bunch of people within a state. It's a state. It's an entire state which is basically saying, we're not going to follow federal law. So what Jackson does is he issues what is known as the Nullification Proclamation. And what the Nullification Proclamation says is that nullification is essentially disunion. And disunion is essentially treason. And he uses this proclamation as a means of requesting from the United States Congress the power to invade South Carolina. He's basically asking Congress to authorize an invasion of South Carolina, sending in troops, knocking heads, and telling them they have to pay the tariff. They have to collect the tariff. I'm not sure if that hits your level of crisis. Think about it. The federal government is in effect almost asking for a declaration of war on a state. Mightn't that lead to kind of your crisis level? Do you have a crisis meter? This is a crisis. Stepping in to help resolve this crisis is Henry Clay. Henry Clay is going to propose what is considered to be the second of three major compromises that he will make to help keep the Union together before the Civil War. This compromise, or the Compromise Tariff of 1833, will gradually, over a number of years, lower the tariff down to what it had been back in 1816. He chose 1816 for a very specific reason. The South had voted in favor of the tariff of 1816, even though it was a protective tariff, because it had been basically, they were afraid of Britain dumping goods on the American market, and we were protecting little baby American industry. Even John C. Calhoun had voted in favor of the tariff of 1816. That's why it chooses 1816. So at this point, the Congress is going to do something that was kind of smart. Now, you will take that down now. You will not hear me say Congress, kind of smart, same sentence, often. Okay? But they're going to do something kind of smart. What they're going to do is they're going to pass both the Force Act and the Compromise Tariff. Force Act and the Compromise Tariff on the very same day, within hours of one another. What they do here is in effect what we call the good old-fashioned carrot and stick. South Carolina, we have a very good tariff for you, and you're gonna like it. Because if you don't like it, won't. Okay? It's a good deal, you better take it. Got it? Carrot and stick. It's a good thing, take it, but if you don't, you're gonna. Do you get it?
Why is it called carrot?
So carrot is the good, stick, wow. So it's either you do because it's good, here's your carrot, and then you'll do it, or if you don't do it because I give you the good deal, I'm gonna make you do it anyway. Get it? Okay. Anyway. South Carolina takes the deal. They repeal the nullification of the tariff of 1828. They repeal the nullification of the tariff of 1832. But they had one last little act of defiance in them. They nullify the Force Act. But here's the thing. The Force Act only goes into effect if they're not collecting the tariff. Are they collecting the tariff? Yes. So the Force Act does not apply. So did they nullify it or didn't they? Well, they say they did. It's an act of defiance. So now I want you to do one last kind of thinky, thoughty thing right here. South Carolina in 1860 will be the first state to secede from the Union. Do you think there's a connection between South Carolina's attitude and actions here in 1832, 1833, and South Carolina's attitude and actions when they become the first state to secede from the Union in 1860, 1861? So just kind of, I want you to kind of think about this. Because hopefully you've started to notice on some of the, on the multiple choice questions, on the stimulus questions, sometimes they are broad, long things. And so I want you to kind of practice this thinking broad, longly. One more minute. Okay, why don't you go to your president's house? Not the White House yet, the president's house, and discuss what your answer is. It's your White House. They didn't call it that yet at the time we're talking. Unfunny jokes, you know. I have to allow me 2 or 3 unfunny jokes.
Why are you standing up? So I said yes. Like I
So describe what's next. What do you think? Do you think there's going to be there's a connection? Just anything that comes to your mind as far as connecting. What do you think?
Didn't advance the division.
It could be.
Not if that's literally like playing against that's like playing against that's like playing against Spencer Stevens. Like
all right, so come on back. Come on back. All right, so la 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 la.
yeah, she's so good.
Peter's not back yet. James is gone, so okay, we'll just go with Matthew. What do you think?
I said she's gathered connection with they were being really rebellious and like how they executed their federal contract. Kind of executed their Muslim stuff according to the South police.
South Carolina was willing to for any existence and purpose of the Union by resisting to obey a national law and in favor of their state in particular, which reflects their willingness to secede from the Union and, like, thereby destroying the Union.
So it's a similar sentiment. And what there's arguments over how Jackson handled this situation. Some people say that he was too gentle, that he should not have accepted the compromise tariff, and that he simply should have gone into South Carolina and forced them to obey the tariff as it was written. Some people said had he taken that tack, it might have prevented the Civil War. Obviously, we cannot know. All right, so the second of our big topics is the bank war. So first of all, just kind of, Annie Jackson comes from the western part of the United States. And really, dating back to the Panic of 1819, there was an anti-bank attitude in the West. Seemed like during the Panic, there were all of these land foreclosures, people lost their farms, and where'd all that money go? Who got out good? The bank did. And so there's kind of a Western sectional anti-bank sentiment. Jackson himself was actually hurt in the Panic. And so he had a personal anti-bank thing going too. So the Bank of the United States was our central bank. It circulated currency, it printed its own currency, but given that it was the depository for the funds of the United States government, it was a currency that people kind of trusted. No matter what state you were in, you knew that Bank of the United States money was trustworthy. The Bank of the United States had another power and function. It regulated other banks' currencies. You see, under the charter that had created the Bank of the United States, they had given this bank the power that if, Molly, your bank printed a whole bunch of money, okay, and it got deposited in the Bank of the United States, the Bank of the United States could ask for that amount of money in gold. And if you don't have it, your bank is finished. The idea is it keeps banks from overprinting money. That they don't just go, woohoo, fire up the printing press. Because at any point, they could be asked for their paper in gold. It regulated our money supply, made it trustworthy. Does that make sense? Well, it was so important to the economy that Henry Clay, before the election of 1832, is looking for an issue. He wants to be president. And he knows that as it stands now, Andy Jackson, popular, he's gonna win. So the only way to beat Andy Jackson is to find some issue, some wedge issue to make him not look as good to the American people. Clay chooses the bank. What he does is he pushes through Congress. He's now a senator. He's in the United States Senate. He pushes through a recharter of the Bank of the United States even before it was going to expire. It was an early recharter. And the only reason he is doing it early, the only reason he is doing it now, is he's trying to set up Jackson. He's basically going to try and make Annie Jackson, I double dog dare you to veto the recharter of the Bank of the United States. He knows that if Andy Jackson is true to what he has stated in the past, to his ideals, to his Western people, he's going to veto that. And what Clay hoped to gain from that veto was basically to say, look what an idiot Andrew Jackson is. He is jeopardizing our entire economy. He hoped that Northern Democrats would turn against the Democratic Party and vote for Clay. Jackson falls into the trap. He vetoes the bill. Clay thinks, got him. But Jackson and his Treasury Secretary, Roger Taney, are going to write an explanation for this veto that is pure political genius. What the explanation did is it basically takes away what the bank does. It tells us nothing about what the bank actually does. And instead, it characterizes it as this boogeyman institution. It says that, you know, this Bank of the United States, it's anti-democratic. It is not controlled by the federal government. It is privately owned. The government can do nothing to make sure that it behaves itself. So if you believe in democracy, this veto is for you. He then appeals to the old school Jeffersonians. The old school Jeffersonians who'd always believed that the bank was wrong, that the bank, was unconstitutional. And he goes to these old Jeffersonians. If you are true to the original ideals of the Jeffersonian Republican Party, this veto is for you. He appeals to the people in the West. Okay, probably didn't take much convincing, but perhaps more importantly to labor. And he says that, you know what this bank is? It is symbolic of the monopolies of these large, giant businesses that are running our lives, and telling us what to do. This bank is that type of institution. And so, making it go away, this veto is for you. To the South, shouldn't banking be a state power? It doesn't say in the Constitution that it is a federal power. If you believe in states' rights, this veto is for you. And patriots everywhere. Did you know that a huge portion of this bank is owned by the British? OMG. Foreigners are running your bank. This veto is for you. Now, the bank director, this guy's name was Nicholas Biddle. He read the veto message, and he was shocked. And he couldn't believe that anybody would believe anything that was in this message. So he pays personally to have the veto message printed in newspapers across the country, thinking that the American people would pick up this and go, oh my God, the president's an idiot. That isn't what happened. Instead, Andy Jackson will crush Henry Clay in the election of 1832. Do the math for me. Why did Clay lose? Okay, so write it down. Why do you think Clay lost? Why does Clay lose this thing? What happened? What happened was. Finish that sentence. And why don't you go visit your Big Ben? Share with them what your thoughts are. Go find your Big Ben. That's the one that you should be moving. I thought when we created that one, someone should be moving across the road. There's no movement at once.
I wrote that. Oh, you're gonna say be a big thing.
Do you want get this one?
This kind of idiot. I don't know, like my
All right, bring it on home. Bring it on home. Bring it on home. She did. She said it was on its way completely everywhere. And she missed her life and limb. Keep it all together. You should thank her in some way. Okay. All right. So, who thinks they can succinctly tell us what happened here? Yeah, still you? Yours was good? Yeah? Okay.
I said they lost simply because Jackson was able to get again that he was on their protection by proving that Beaton was going to
I don't copy down what he
You do it one more time with these people over here listening.
Clay lost simply because Jackson was able to prove yet again that he was for the people and their protection by proving that vetoing the bill would be a good thing.
Snaps. So think about it. Look at far less messy than the 24 election. Far more in favor of Andy Jackson, but there is kind of an anomaly. South Carolina. South Carolina, they weren't going to vote for Jackson. And no, this is not the people. In South Carolina, they had not allowed the people a public vote for the presidency yet. This is the state legislature. And the state legislature had no intention of giving votes to Andy Jackson in the time of the nullification crisis. They also didn't like the central government guy, Henry Clay. So basically, they protest voted. They gave their votes to the governor of the state next door. Kind of like if you don't like either candidate and writing Mickey Mouse. bank war ain't quite over yet, okay? Because in the eyes of Andy Jackson, he basically wounded the bank. He had not killed it. So he writes to his friend, who was the Speaker of the House, James Kipple, and he says, "The Hydra of corruption, scotched, not dead. Beat it down, but we haven't killed it." Now, what's a Hydra, by the way? A multi-headed thing. And if you cut off the head of a Hydra, what happens? Two grow back. Okay? And so he basically thought this was a corrupt institution. And by the way, there was corruption. The Bank of the United States had a tendency to give loans. Have a loan, oh congressperson. Pay it back whenever. What's a loan that, there's really no payment back thing expected? There's no word for it.
Right.
Okay.
Did Jackson know that Clay did that on purpose?
That's a good question. My decision.
How do we know that he that was his intention?
Because there was other people that were kind of in the room when it happened. For one, Daniel Webster was also there as part of the group that approached the bank director to say that we're going to recharter group. So what Jackson wants to do is finally end the bank, put it out of our misery. So what he does is he tells his Treasury Secretary, Roger Taney, to take all the federal funds out of the Bank of the United States and deposit them into state banks. Now, this is a Democratic Party government. If you're Roger Taney and you're now getting to decide what banks in America get all the federal money, are you picking well-known Federalist, National Republican or Whig-owned banks? Or are you choosing well-known Democratic Party-owned banks? This is, again, the spoil system. You're rewarding your friends. We call them, for this, the pet banks. The pet banks. Now, Henry Clay believes that this is illegal. So what he tries to do is draw the attention of the American people to this illicit act by passing through the United States Senate a censure of the president. A censure is simply this: bad president, you were bad. It's a statement that the president did a wrong thing. It has no enforcement, it has no power. It is simply a huge statement in the congressional record saying the president did the wrong thing. Later, by the way, the Democrats get control of the Senate and they repeal the censure. And if you go to the United States congressional record to this day, you look for the censure, what you will find is the censure with hashed lines through it. Because technically it no longer exists. Anyway, but Jackson basically wins. He's taken all the money out of the Bank of the United States, crippling it as far as its ability to control the money supply. And then he simply allows the charter to run out and bye-bye bank. What Jackson single-handedly did is he's going to end central control over our national banking system. The bank is gone. Okay. Now, there's a tiny little word, you know how I want you to start thinking of the future and stuff, things like that? Remember I said about every 20 years we had downturns, panics. Our last panic was in 1819. The next panic will happen in 1837, just as Jackson leaves office. Got it? Our final story of the day. Andy Jackson's policy toward American Indians. Now, in the late 1820s, the attitude of whites, particularly in the South, toward American Indians was that they should be moved. The state of Georgia, there had been an agreement that when they gave up their lands in the West, what became Alabama, that the government would work to push American Indians out of Georgia. This, by the late 1820s, had still not yet happened. Of course, American Indians that lived in these places did not want to leave. And they're going to resist being moved or pushed out in many different ways. One of the groups that resisted were the Cherokee of Georgia. And what their method of resistance, assimilation. What they basically are going to try and do is mirror the society that surrounds them. The idea is that if we're like the society that surrounds us, maybe the society that surrounds us will leave us alone. Maybe we will just be able to be who we are, and nobody's going to mess with us anymore. So what the Cherokee are going to do is they're going to develop a settled system of agriculture. They're going to hold private property with deeds. They're going to create their own legal code. And they are so much reflecting the surrounding society that they even had cotton plantations and slaves. Does this work? In 1828, just as John Quincy Adams is leaving office and Andrew Jackson is coming in, the state of Georgia tells the Cherokee that they need to go. They basically stated that the land that the Cherokee were living on belonged to the state of Georgia, for the state of Georgia to decide how to use, and that they can go. Andrew Jackson was fully supportive of Georgia's claim. This goes into kind of the states' rights version in Jackson world. When it was the tariff and it was about the Union, okay, the Union. But when it's something within the sovereign state of Georgia, it's Georgia. Got it? So Jackson, when he becomes president, he's going to address this issue. He's going to make a proposal that will eventually be incorporated into the Indian Removal Act of 1830. What it did is it proposed moving all tribes, all nations of American Indians that lived east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi. They would be moved to what was called permanent American Indian Territory. It is today the state of Oklahoma, but then it was permanent American Indian Territory. The idea, says Jackson, is it will allow the American Indian race to be preserved. People can be however they want to be, way far on the other side of the Mississippi River. He also says that this action was to be voluntary. But voluntary in Jackson world is not quite the same as it is for most folks. This is what Jackson means by voluntary. You can either move under federal protection, or the state can do whatever they want to you. And remember, this is in reaction to Georgia, and what did Georgia want the Cherokee to do? Leave. So this was your choice. You can move, or move. Voluntary. You can move, federal government will move, or Georgia, have at it. And what does Georgia want you to do? The Move or Move Voluntary Move Program. Move. Are you with me? Do you kind of get his rhetoric? Do you kind of get how he's saying what he's saying? But you also get what it really means. The Cherokee. The Cherokee are going to try and prevent Georgia from forcing them to leave. Okay? Because that's the one that totally is not voluntary. By taking them to court. They are going to sue in what eventually becomes the United States Supreme Court in a case known as Worcester versus Georgia. And in this case, the United States Supreme Court will side with the Cherokee. Now, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, he didn't go as far as to agree with what had been stated in the Treaty of Greenville, or basically recognizing the Cherokee land as a separate nation within a nation. But he basically did describe kind of a semi-autonomous state where Cherokee should be allowed to retain their land and should be able to retain their culture and lifestyle. Jackson, they say, said this. Okay, so there's one of those, we're not positive he said it exactly this way, but enough people reported this thing that we think something pretty close was said. That is Mr. Marshall's decision. Let him enforce it. Now, obviously, the court does not enforce decisions. The federal government's job is to, the president's job is to enforce decisions. So what is basically Jackson saying about this decision of the court? It doesn't matter. Jackson refused to recognize the court's decision. What he says is that the people, okay, the people should have the last word on this issue, not the court. And the voting people of Georgia, what do they want? That land. Georgia, what do they want? That one? Yeah?
What gave him the right to not, like, enforce it?
He does not have the right to not enforce it.
Okay.
He just doesn't enforce it.
So does anything happen, like?
Was his action an unpopular action which would get the wrath of the people of the country all up in arms? Or was his action a popular action that basically is in effect going to get excused? The court's action was the unpopular one. The court's action, the legal action, was the unpopular one. And so sometimes you can get away with stuff if what you're doing is the popular thing. Jackson argued that it was wrong to create semi-independent states within the United States. That basically when the state of Georgia was created as the state of Georgia is the state of Georgia. It is not the state of Georgia with the land of Cherokee in the middle. It's Georgia. When we signed a treaty with Great Britain where the United States got all the land east of the Mississippi River, the treaty said this is the land of the United States. That's what the treaty said. It didn't say this is the land of the United States, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, no. It was the United States. The result of Jackson's action Jackson, okay, is that the Cherokee will be forced to move. The movement of the Cherokee is described as the Trail of Tears, where this movement which took place, okay, in the cold of winter, 4,000 people will die. Eventually, the implementation of the Indian Removal Act, almost all American Indians in the Southeast will be moved. The Chickasaw will be moved. The Choctaw will be moved. The Cherokee will be moved. The Creek will be moved. There was one exception, and it's not a full exception. It's a slight exception. The Seminole of Florida. You see, the Seminole of Florida is not a state. Florida is completely under the control of the federal government. And so when the Seminole did not take the deal, this is when we really find out that voluntary is not voluntary. Because when the Seminole do not move, the federal government comes in with troops. The United States and the Seminole will fight the bloodiest American Indian War in American history. That is measured, of course, by the number of dead Americans. We do not know the number of dead Seminole. 1,500 American soldiers died fighting this war. In the end, the Seminole will be defeated for the most part. And about 4/5 of the Seminole people will be moved to permanent American Indian Territory in what is today Oklahoma. But 1/5 retreated into the swamps of the Everglades. American troops did not follow them into the swamps of the Everglades. And so they hold that land to this very day. American Indian removal, some people call the entire thing the Trail of Tears. Technically, it is only the movement of the Cherokee that is truly what we call the Trail of Tears. These other lines, the movement of the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Creek, okay, are their Indian removals, okay, all going to what was supposed to be permanent American Indian territory until it becomes the state of Oklahoma. For next time. Hopefully you now have something to react to as far as Andy Jackson's presidency. So for your entrance ticket for next time, step 1, I want you to react. What is the impact of Andy Jackson? 2, I want you to go to the section of your textbook that's right after where they talk about Andy Jackson. It is called The Impact of Jackson. Read that, and I would like you to be able to describe the impact of toward the Supreme Court and his appointment of Roger Taney as the Chief Justice. And B, what is the impact of him on state constitutions, changes that happened there in that era. Questions, comments, concerns? These should be a couple paragraphs, okay? A couple paragraphs in your notebook. Couple paragraphs in your notebook. Couple paragraphs in your notebook. Yeah. They just, the area in circle of Oklahoma gets shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So it was the whole area, now it's that.